like to know how it's going on in LA for you, for the Lacma.
Yeah, well, as you know, it's been difficult for every museum in so many different ways. When we are so geared to the public, that's our whole reason for being. And so we shut down, I think, March 14th, along with a couple of days around. That's about the time most museums, I think, shut. And we were in the middle of several installations, including one for our next show, which is Nara. You're
Okay.
still in Nara, big show. And then we had another show we just barely installed, which was Vera Luther. Do you know her work? Vera Luther. She makes the beautiful big pinhole. So her work was just installed, and we were supposed to have the opening the next week. And then Nara was stopped in mid-installation. So we don't know when we're opening. As you know, every museum has been leveraging its online resources for, museum at home. I think within 3 days we had our website rebuilt, new homepage. And we have a huge program, education program. We're one of the largest museum in-school teaching artist programs. And so one of the big things we've been trying to do is use that education force to develop, activities for families and kids at home. So that's what we're working on.
You are working on it, or it's already working?
Some of them are already there. You can go, if you check our website, and, we're doing, like everybody, we're doing online film programs. Our film curator is doing that. We have music from the Fiji show, which is on view. You can listen to a beautiful playlist of Fijian music. So we're doing what we can to keep our audience and the world learning and calm through this crisis, like everyone else.
Is there an increase of your attendance on the site? Have you observed something like that?
Yes, we haven't. I have to get the measurements, but yes, of course, it's, I think for every museum, but for ours, a lot. We have if you go on our Instagram stories, I don't know if you use Instagram, but we now have this kind of fun two-way relationship where people are requesting images, and we're not only posting images, we're posting images with commentary that is, kind of humorous and interesting. And then we're asking people what they want to see, and within hours responding to what they want to see with new commentary. So it's been a chance to have a two-way dialogue with our audience as well. And again, I know everyone's doing this. It's just we're pushing it as hard as we can.
Yes, of course.
And then we have, but it's very difficult. We're paying all of our employees. As you know, some museums have started to let go of, especially part-time employees. But we're trying to pay them all. And we are paying them all.
And how many employees do you have?
About 550.
Wow.
So for every museum, you've read the headlines, it's been, difficult financially because of the huge loss of revenue. We have, you'll see that there are some museums that have built reserves, and we have reserves to cover, an emergency like this.
Oh, really?
But not indefinitely. But yes, we have significant reserves that we've saved up over the years for emergencies, and so we're using those reserves right now, month by month. And then
because
everyone's at. Yep.
You were speaking about the MoCA, right?
MoCA, a lot of museums have. You can just read the headlines, but MoCA's just one.
Yeah, but it's in the same city.
Yeah. Hammer, MoCA.
Hammer too?
But,
wow.
I'm not, every museum has to survive, so it's difficult. I understand. I'm sympathetic.
Yes, for sure. And Yes, and you had a very ambitious strategy with Peter Zumthor and the new buildings. So how all that is going on? What's your feeling?
So luckily, very luckily, we had everything on time. So I now look back and realize the importance of being on time, because we were able to finish all the pre-construction projects that we needed to finish, and it is now, the site is in the hands of the contractors, and they're continuing. Right now they're doing demolition, interior demolition, removing all the hazardous materials.
They are working?
The next few months.
They are working now?
Yes, because they're doing hazardous materials removal. So they're wearing hazardous material suits. They're working. Everything is very careful, and they have to follow all the guidelines. So in the U.S., there's certain construction projects where interior work is being done, or it's difficult to do things with people separated, and those construction projects have slowed down. Also, construction projects have slowed down where there was a lack of materials that could be delivered. But our project is in the demolition phase, so there's no need for new materials, and it's very safe work. And so we can.
Yeah, how long is it supposed to be, the demolition phase?
So we about 4 months, so 3 to 4 months. So let's see, April, May, June, July. Yeah, 3 to 4 months. So obviously, if things go beyond that, we'll see. But for the next 3 to 4 months, it's demolition. So that goes on, and we finished the bulk of our fundraising. I think you may have seen a headline. We got to the $650 million just a month and a half ago. So that's the cost of the building. And so we raised all the money for the building. We still have to raise $100 million for things around the building, but we have years to do that. So we're in a good position to continue.
But now,
and I think
please.
And it's interesting because the calls now for how do we rebuild our economy, and people are looking back to times, whether it was the Great Depression or even recent economic downturns, and it really is important that we build things, make art. So I think that this project will be. No one could have anticipated its importance in terms of the local economy, just because thousands of people will work on this project. So it will be a key in sort of economic recovery by creating a huge number of jobs for people over the next 4 years as we recover. And I think it's funny, it was the opposite previously, because construction was booming and it was hard to get the right people, and it was a very competitive market because the business was booming. And now, of course, it's very important to put people to work, to have projects. And a lot of projects have been stalled because they were in planning phases or, are not ready. So we know that this will be a good element of the economic recovery for Los Angeles.
But you are not showing your permanent collection anymore.
No, we do. About half the works, half the projects that are in our. So I think that we the strategy was over the last 10 years we built 2 new buildings and doubled the size of the museum so that we could tear down the old museum. And so we have the same amount of space operating today. Well, not today because we're closed.
In the future.
when we reopen, the same amount of space as when I moved to Los Angeles. Oh, so Lacma is that big. And so what we're doing is blending permanent collection and special exhibitions. And what we're trying to do, for example, is show aspects of our collection that haven't been as well seen in recent times. So, for example, we did a huge exhibition of the life of animals in Japanese art,
Yes.
but it was half our collection.
Oh, okay.
And then we did a show of photography of Thomas Joshua Cooper. That was all our collection. Or we did a show of Sri Lankan art last year that was half our collection. So what we're trying to do is blend collection and programs in this space that's 100,000 or 10,000 square meters of exhibition space that is open.
But I read that the Amundsen Foundation was not happy about the fact that you were not showing much of the permanent collection.
Well, actually, they said they were worried that we would not show as much of it in the future. They know we're under construction, but that's, being honest, that's their speculation. We have plans to show those masterpieces in a more, personally, I think they will be shown more beautifully in the new building because they will be in better galleries. Lacma, the Lacma used to be called, all the staff called it Lacma because every time it would rain, water would come through the walls and we had to remove Amundsen works when it rained. So the idea that these works will be in a beautiful new space, we are fully, I've said this in the press and I've said it to the Amundsens, I'm fully confident that they will be, that they will enjoy the way their works are shown. They're going to be closer to the public, more accessible in, safe galleries. So, and there's a big misunderstanding. I think this comes from a singular misunderstanding. The buildings that are coming down are being replaced with this Peter Zumthor building. It's a tiny bit smaller in galleries than those older galleries.
Yes.
But it's part of a 3-building plan. So between 2008 and 2024, the plan always was for exhibition space to go from 12,000 square meters to 22,000 square meters. And so that is actually what we will accomplish by 2024. And so as you can see, just by those numbers, there will be vast amount more space for collections.
It's for collection or for exhibition or for the two?
Well, for the two, but it's going to be 80% collection. So it's a vast amount more space for collections.
Oh, okay.
Huge, and it's just a kind of it's a misunderstanding that's rippled through the press because technically, yes, the buildings they replaced, but it was part of a long-term plan, and you can see why we did it so that we could be open now, not now, but open while we're under construction with a very vibrant program. We have beautiful shows of our collection coming up. Jose Luis Blondet is doing a show of a very eclectic group of works that will be entirely collection, but it'll have some of the favorite masterpieces, but then it will have unknown things in it. And it has a thematic, it's a thematic exhibition. So what we're doing is using this occasion to show the collection in very different ways, which would make sense. And then we have a whole show we're doing that's going to be in a year and a half on the idea of the Kunstkammer that's going to look at, Dutch 17th century, the origins of the museum and the Kunstkammer using our collections.
Ah, cool.
So in a way, it's a really exciting time, not while we're closed for coronavirus, but while we're open during construction. It's a very exciting time for curators to look at works differently. In addition, we're lending some of our work, some of our European masterpieces are at the Getty Museum. They selected a few, so that's rare that they could be there. We would never otherwise, obviously, show them at the Getty.
When?
So they're up now. Well, they're up now. They're closed to the public. but they're there now for long term for 4 years, and they're about 5 or 6 works. And again, that's something we would never do when
that's
we
interesting.
were.
Because on the site, it's written that the permanent collection, one can't see the permanent collection. On your site, it's written.
I think it just says that those galleries are closed, but we were just rebuilding the website to identify all the works from the collection that are on view in all of these exhibitions.
Okay.
So, yeah, traditionally we had, most of the collection in the old buildings, but now while we're closing, we're developing this different program. And then when we open, actually we're already making plans for 2024. And there are quite a few collection installations in the Resnick Pavilion and the Broad Contemporary Art Museum. For example, by the fall, if we're not delayed, the bulk of the modern collections, late 19th century through mid-century, will be in the Broad B-Camp on the top floor.
Ah, okay.
So a lot of favorites, David Hockney's Mulholland Road and the Picassos and Rancuzzi's, and all of that is going to go back on view as early as this fall.
And that's interesting. So, but your funding come mostly from private collectors, right? If we don't speak about all the Zoom Talk project, if we just speak about the everyday life in the museum, how do you finance it?
So if you take the everyday life, which is the running of the museum, the acquiring of artworks and paying some of that, we spend about 20 to 25% of that comes from the local government, Los Angeles County.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest comes from private philanthropy, ticket sales. I mean, I don't know that you want to break down, but, memberships.
No, just to have a general idea.
Yeah. And then specific gifts, foundations, private or earned revenue. For example, we make something like $6 million a year in our ticket sales.
So all that is vanishing?
Yes, for a time. That's why we have reserves.
And so reserve, for how long do you imagine you have reserve?
Well, the rule is you're supposed to have 10% of your annual budget in reserve, and we have a lot more than that. We have almost double. So we don't know. You don't know because you don't know what other costs or whatever crises are going to happen in the next month. But look, if we end up reopening in the summer, it's going to be difficult, but everybody, or the early fall, will survive. And I think that we don't know what the future looks like because obviously it may be a long time before crowds can gather, before we can have openings, before we can have, we have outdoor concerts. Our seats will have to be 6 feet apart, I'm sure, for a while. So we don't quite know yet what the shape of the museum looks like in opening, and so we don't know what the revenues are. This is true for every museum. Obviously, you're doing this in terms of every museum. So it's all similar. Whether we'll be back to business as usual anytime this year, I doubt it. I doubt we'll be business as usual anytime in 2020 because even in the summer and fall, people are going to be being careful.
Yeah.
I do remember I've been through several crises, economic crises, just being old. And, 9/11 was a very difficult time. I was running a museum dia in New York.
Ah, oui.
And I do remember how difficult that was. But I also remember how generous people were. So as you know, there was a giant economic downturn, especially in the United States. And then, of course, New York had even worse problems because we were closed for so long. And so many private people came to our aid. remember Mayor Bloomberg at that time used his personal foundation to subsidize almost every cultural institution in New York City.
Wow.
And of course he was mayor and he felt the responsibility, but he did it out of his private funds and foundation. And what was important is that he recognized how critical the cultural institutions were to the well-being of the city and to the economics of the city, that we weren't, another thing off to the side. And I think it's something right now that you hear out there that a lot of people don't recognize how fundamentally important the cultural sector is to the economic well-being as well as to the spiritual and mental health and education. But I think people put it in that category of education, spiritual and mental health, and they don't often think about the massive economic impact. In the United States, if you take culture as a whole, it's more important, more people attend events than sporting events. And that includes, music and other things. So it's right now, as people are struggling to find out how to build our recovery worldwide, I think often, as sometimes in education, art can be put as an extracurricular, but as a whole, it's not just art for the mind, for the body, but it's art for the economy. And
but
many people.
Do you have a Bloomberg in LA?
Do I have what?
A Bloomberg.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what everyone's asking. We don't, I don't know. There is, it's funny, somebody asked me yesterday whether there were philanthropists getting together to do the same thing. And I do know there's discussion. I do know there's discussion, nothing concrete. It's a little early also because people don't know what the accumulated losses are and what it will take to rebuild. But I know there are discussions going on. And again, I remember from 9/11, from that time, that people really were generous. And we had a couple of people last week. We had two beautiful works of art gifted to us. One, somebody gave us millions of dollars to acquire a work. One was a work worth millions of dollars. I had a $1 million gift that was offered by a trustee just 3 days ago.
Oh, wow.
For the campaign. So it's not that everything stops.
For the campaign, you mean your project?
Yeah, for the building project.
And what about, you can give names?
I could. They're not huge numbers compared to what everybody else is given. So I don't want to one person. But I'm just saying that my own personal experience of history is that people also are generous. And so I do have faith that people will help us get back to, I don't know, not normal, but allow us to continue to play our important role. And I do feel philanthropy will sustain us.
And do you think that you would be open, you would be able to reopen in June or July?
No one knows. I don't think they know in Paris, do they? Is anyone predicting? Have there been any statements?
No, but all over the world, they guess. For example, in China, in Beijing, they speak about June.
Yeah, I think they're speaking about June in China, and I think people are talking about July, August here, but it's a little hard to tell. I think it will be staged too. I don't imagine that everything will open in one day. And so we're again, that's probably the next problem to consider. We're already starting to think about how we would reopen and how would we reopen to, for example, manage a sparse number of people in the galleries. For example, we'll probably get rid of, those big wall texts where people congregate. Just simple things, like that we may want for a time we may even have to design our exhibitions differently.
Oh, that's
So these are just
interesting.
all the things we're starting to think about. We may have to have timed tickets, just to control numbers of people in galleries for a while. So I think we know that there won't be one day soon when it will just be business as usual. We assume that it'll be a gradual process of reopening.